Well, I'm into another fish. You join me today on a rather windy, and it's a very cold wind, Westwood Lakes in Lincolnshire. It's one of the nicest kept fisheries. It's a long drive from where I live. It's really well kept. And we're into another fish. I've probably had about half a dozen fish now, and I've got to admit that the weather has really turned this certainly last day or two. It's really gone cool, and that one's unhooked itself as it's gone into the net. How good's that? I've got a hoodie on. It's the first time I've had a hoodie on for a while, so it's a sign that winter is obviously upon us. And these fish are, I didn't really notice it until the last couple. They are freezing. They're really cold. Or maybe it's me. I'm getting nesh. Maybe that's what it is. Let's just have a look at him, just to show you the stamp of fish we've been catching. I've caught some F1s. In fact, the biggest fish I've had today was actually an F1. He's very lively, this one, so I don't want to hold him up too long for you, but there you can go. See the stamp of fish I'm catching? It's very, very cold, and that wind's obviously making it cooler, but that's what happens this time of year, obviously. Starts to cool down, and as you'd expect, that changes the way that the fish are feeding, you know. We've had a fantastic summer, haven't we? And all that tapping and slapping and pellet waggler fishing is out of the window now, you know. We've got to just change our approach and slow down the way that we're feeding, and sometimes the approach is different as well. And to be fair, that's exactly what's happening today. Didn't expect it. When you come to snake lakes, as they refer to them, these lakes like this, you've got to have a bit of an open mind, you know, and the way that you would fish this sort of a lake in summer, quite often you can catch fish on the same spot all day as long as you've got feed going in and that sort of thing. But at this time of year and going into winter, you've got to be a little bit, sometimes you've got to be a little bit mobile. You know, you're almost chasing fish round the peg almost, and we've seen that happening already today. So it's very interesting in that respect. But the setup I've got it's a very simple setup. I'm fishing with a method feeder at the moment, a normal method feeder. Okay, that's the one without sides, as we refer to it. The actual setup, I'm fishing close to the other bank at the moment. I did start a little bit away from the bank, but I'll go into that in a little while for you. So because this is a snake lake, as they call it, that is obviously reflected in the kit that I'm using. Okay, so I'm using this lovely soft bomb rod, the XRC. It's only 9 foot. It's all you need on venues like this. I'm casting about, I don't know what that is, about 18 metres, something like that. And on a day like today, even if you have got a pole that will go across there, having a nice bomb setup like this with a nice 3000 reel, that's all you need on this sort of a setup. That's the XR reel. It's loaded with 6 pound main line, Horizon main line, straight through. No need for fancy shock leaders or anything like that. It's got a 1 ounce tip, and on days like this, even if you could get across there with a pole, having a setup like this will mean that you can still fish those areas on windy days like this. You know, it'd be very, very difficult to hold a pole out there today. So by having a setup like this in your armoury, it means that obviously you can still reach those areas if the conditions are bad. So that's the setup. I've just got an the normal method feeder on, free running, just like that complies with most fishery rules. A nice quick change bead there, and then I've got a 4-inch hook length, and everything's just scaled down a little bit. They're the actual figures there of the actual hook length that I'm actually using. All right, really, I mean, these are ready tied, you know, they're superb for this job, and they will pretty much land just about anything that you're going to hook on these sorts of venues. So I've actually got a band on there, as you can see. I've still got the pellet on there. I'm fishing with, I've been changing between a 6mm hard pellet and a 4mm, and obviously by having a band on like that, you can, obviously, it's quick and easy to change. I've got a selection of different bandums, I've got wafters, and I'll talk to you about those in a moment. So for now, the best bait up to now has been just a banded pellet. So obviously a banding tool will make this job much, much easier. Just pop those prongs into the band, and they will help you. That will open the band out, and then all you do then is select your pellet, whatever size you fancy using, and that is just a really nice, quick and easy way of getting your pellet onto a band, you know. And you can do that, obviously use that for dead maggots, anything like that, anything you want to. It just makes it really nice and quick and easy. And then all I'm doing is I'm fishing with 2mm pellets. I've got the mould here, which obviously makes this job much easier. Now, one of the things to remember is on windy days like this, there is a bit of sun today, that these pellets will dry out as your session goes on. So just bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm just putting a few pellets in the top there. I'm trying not to load it up too much, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, why that is. Once we get this feeder out there, a few pellets on top. So I'm not filling it, because I don't want too many pellets going out there. Because like I say, the water's cold, the fish aren't going mad, and there's your perfectly formed pellets. And me personally, just because these pellets are a little bit harder than normal, I like to experiment with how soft or hard the pellets are. Sometimes that can make a difference. I like to just give it a press, just for peace of mind that those pellets are going to be still on the feeder when it hits the surface of the water. And I always like the loop to come out of the back like that, just so it's out of the way. And that's it. This particular feeder is just 15 gram. These are marked up with weights on the bottom. And there isn't a steep shelf over there. If it was a steep shelf, you might want to have a 25 gram feeder on, just to help keep it up that shelf. But obviously with this interchangeable system, you can obviously change the feeder really easily. So we'll get that back out there. Okay, so that's out there. I am clipped up, but I'll try to hit the clip over here. So I've got a couple of turns of line on the reel, and then just get the line, or the rod under the water to get that line sunk out of the way. This chop and the wind on it is obviously going to help that. That's sunk now already. And then pop it in the rest. One of the things that's really important, and you know, obviously through coaching and the videos that we produce and the feedback that we get, it's amazing how many people don't quite get this set up right. I know quite a few people that have lost rods this year, and I hate to see that, you know. Things like your rod rests that you use, the feeder arm is obviously nice and sturdy, but the actual rod rest itself is so important when you're fishing like this. You need something that's got a V on it like that. You need a nice angle in it, because these fish are self-hooking, and this type of a butt rest here, as you can see, that's actually pushed in. It actually grips the rod, and it just means that, you know, when you're fishing a method like this, which is self-hooking way of fishing, the bites can be violent, they really can, and that's how people lose rods. You've only got to turn around or pour a drink out or pick your phone up, and before you know it, your rod's gone. So just by having that set up, it's just a bit of peace of mind, you know, that you're not going to lose your gear. I hate to see people spending money on their hard-earned money on tackle and then losing it through something like that, and it spoils your day as well. So, as you've seen, I'm using 2mm pellets around the feeder. I've got a hard pellet on the hook. However, I have got a selection here. As we all know, changing baits can be an ideal way of keeping fish going in your net. So I've got a selection of pellets here. That's the selection I carry with me in these nice little pots that come with this bag. You know, that's all I carry to my matches. There's lots of selections of different baits, different wafters and things in there. So that's all I've got on my tray. There's a selection of different pellets in there, 8mm, 6mm and 4mm. I've got some wafters here if I want to try those. And that's really it for today. I'm keeping it simple. However, I have got the option of ground bait. Now this has dried out a little bit, but one thing I do it in summer as well, but certainly through winter, quite often if the fish don't want loads of pellets or lots of feed, you can actually just have a cast with just ground bait. And by doing that, you're obviously introducing some smell into the water. The other thing you're doing is you're putting some cloud into the water as well, which can be enough to catch a fish. But the other thing as well, which can be just as important, is you're actually cutting off the feed supply. You know, you're actually cutting out all the pellets, so that if a fish does go to that little ball of ground bait that you've introduced, well, right in the middle of it is your hook bait. And sometimes that could be a brilliant way of keeping fish coming, particularly through winter. And it has actually worked today. We caught a couple of quick fish on pellets. That was just short of the far bank. And then it went quiet. All we could get then was a few line bites and things. So I just switched to ground bait. It obviously only took me a minute. I just put ground bait around the feeder and I caught 2 quick fish doing that. And then it went quiet again. So then I went back to pellets, and then I've had another run of fish as well. So sometimes, you know, you're constantly ringing the changes, just trying to keep fish coming. Now, one of the things that is very, it's a great tactic through winter on lots and lots of venues like this, not only snake lakes, but particularly on some of the open water lakes, is just being a bit mobile, okay? I'm just going to bring this in, is being mobile. Sometimes you find that you might catch a couple of fish in one spot, and then you can't catch any more fish there. If you have a cast somewhere else, it might only be a metre to the right, a metre to the left. It's amazing how you can catch another couple of fish. We do it in pole fishing, you know, you see it all the time, particularly in F1 fishing, and that is obviously something that we replicate in feeder fishing. And that's what's happened today. I caught about 4 fish in one spot, and then that was it. Couldn't really catch any more there. Just got 1 or 2 liners and stuff, and I had a cast about a metre to the right. I caught a couple of fish, and I've done that a few times today. I've gone right, I've gone left, and each time I've done it, I've caught a fish. Now, when you're fishing like that, obviously, it's important to try and remember where your feeder's landed, obviously, because you want to know where to go to next. And obviously, if you catch a fish there, you want to know where to cast back to. But what you've got to remember is that every time you cast into a different spot, you're obviously leaving a load of pellets there, aren't you? Now, if those fish are eating all those pellets, then that's not a massive issue, is it? Because obviously the fish are eating the pellets and hopefully you're catching fish as well. So that's not a massive deal. However, as the water gets colder, as the fish slow down, one of the things you've got to remember is that when fish slow down, they're not moving as much, they're not burning energy. So if they're not burning energy, they're not having to replace that energy by eating. It's quite simple, isn't it? So what you've got to remember is that if you're going to be casting to different parts of the swim, if you're using a feeder like the one I'm using now, which is a small feeder, by winter standards, there's still quite a lot of pellet being introduced in each cast. And before you know it, if you've had 3 or 4 casts at different spots in your swim, you could literally end up with different piles of pellets all over your peg. And I'm not saying that'll stop you catching fish, but it's going to knock your confidence a little bit, isn't it? And it means that in time, there's fish topping there, about 4 metres out. So if you're going to be mobile like that, one of the best ways of just trying to control it and make sure you're not feeding too much is by scaling your feeder down, okay? And that is why with this interchangeable system that we've got the option of doing that. So one of the first moves that I would make would be to just switch down, and the next time I reel in, I'll show you how you can do this, because as you probably noticed, I haven't caught a fish since that first one, so it has slowed down a little bit, so I will be making a change anyway. So you can change down. This is the open method style. That's the style with the sides on it, as people say, and that obviously holds a much smaller amount of pellet. We can literally push in just that many pellets if we wish, or we could mound more on. So by casting around the swim with that sort of a feeder, you're not going to be leaving loads and loads of pellets everywhere. All right, so that's a great winter feeder, that one. That's an inter-size one. It's just 20 gram, which is all we need today. The other option is obviously a pellet feeder. Now the great thing with a pellet feeder is that you can feed even less with that, okay? If I pop some pellets in there, you can literally see how few you can actually get away with. And the great thing with a pellet feeder is that quite often, I mean, I am getting a few liners today. There are some silverfish there. I have caught a skimmer, and sometimes with an open method feeder or a normal method feeder, fish can get at that bait from all different angles, you know. And sometimes when there's silverfish there, the fish can pick off bits of bait, and they're not really committing to where your hook bait is, where you presented it in the middle. With a pellet feeder, there's only one way in. As you can see, they can't get to the pellets this way. They can only get to the pellets that way. So the fish is really committed to taking the pellets right where your hook bait is. So if you're struggling with line bites, if you're struggling, sometimes you've got too many fish in your swim. Obviously this is more of a problem in summer, but just switching to that sort of a pellet feeder, it can just transform those indications into fish. All right, and then the final option we've got then is obviously a bomb, and that will obviously cut down completely on the food that's been introduced. You might be loose feeding pellets via a catapult, or you might just want to just not feed anything. You know, you might be an hour into the session, you've had 4 or 5 casts in different places, you might feel as though there's quite a bit of pellet spread out there. To quickly and easily just slide one of those bombs on, you're cutting off the complete supply of food altogether, and obviously that bomb you can literally cast anywhere in your swim and you're not leaving any bait. So I could have a stray cast to the left, I could even drop it down the middle on this short line here, and you're not depositing any bait anywhere. And sometimes by doing that you might pick off an extra fish or 2, which would be great. But what it's also doing, I think that's a line bite, but what that's also doing is it's resting your main line, which again on its own, sometimes you haven't got to make a change to bring your swim back to life. Sometimes just a rest will bring it back to life. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to change this now. So all I do is pop that nose cone off, if you want to call it that. Slide the feeder off. There's a slot in the bike, so I can just slide that off. So that's your rig. You know, that's your main rig, and we can slide anything onto that. So in this first step or first change, I'm just going to put on the inter-size 20 gram feeder. That slides on there. Make sure it's pushed on. Put the nose back on, and there we go. So now when I load this up now, you're going to see how little feed I can actually put in. So I'm just going to put a base layer there, lay the pellet on, so I'm keeping the same hook bait and everything, but all I'm doing is reducing the amount of feed. And all I'm going to do is just lightly cover it. And you can see how little feed we've got there in comparison to that feeder when that was loaded. And obviously now, if I am going to be mobile, I'm not leaving as many pellets around. And the other thing as well is, because you're not feeding as much, the hungry fish that are there, there's fewer pellets there for them to pick up. So you're not starving them on to the hook, but you're just cutting back on how many freebies you're actually giving them. And sometimes just a change like that will get you a fish. It's just thinking about how many pellets out there are actually getting eaten, and trying to get that nice balance between putting enough pellets out there to create a bit of a trap, but obviously your hook bait's going to be in the middle of that. And there we go, we've got them straight away. You know, that wasn't in long at all, was it? So I had 2 or 3 casts without a fish. All I've done is just change that feeder, which took me 1 minute, and we're into a fish. And that's what you're doing at this time of year. But the biggest thing to remember is that, being mobile, you know, if fish are going to back off like they do in winter, don't think when they back off they've gone right around the other side of the lake. There might be 2 or 3 meters to the left or the right. And don't forget that just by catching fish, that is creating disturbance. So don't be surprised if they just want, that's a good fish, don't be surprised if they just want a rest, you know. And you know, when you're catching fish like that, you don't need to be catching them every minute to build a weight, you know. If you're catching them every 10 minutes, 20 minutes even, that can often be the way that you're going to build your net of fish. So, I mean, you've seen firsthand there, by just changing the feeder, it can just help you keep picking off those extra fish, which, let's face it, all beautiful fish any time of year. This one's very lively. But you can see by just ringing the changers, having a nice interchangeable system that gives you those options, that you can still put some lovely nets of fish together with one rod, one reel, one setup, and you can tackle loads of different areas of the swim. So I hope you found this useful. I hope you picked up some tips, and we really hope it's going to help you catch more fish through winter.